this vaccine program getting underway. It's a monumental task. Are they getting it right? I mean, it's too early to tell, of course, but the phase 1 objectives that seem to be fairly easy achieved, at least as one commentator's been saying.
I would tend to agree with you. I think because phase 1, they're really looking at vaccinating only the frontline workers, healthcare workers, essential workers. So that totals to about 30 million individuals. So if you look at the existing universal immunization program in India, we already have the experience of disseminating about 500 to 550 million doses every year. So that's how much we do covering the pediatric population and pregnant women population. So vaccinating 30 million more and delivering another 60 million doses doesn't seem like much of a stretch. So I think phase 1, we do seem to have the cold chain infrastructure and the vaccine administrator to be able to do so. I think the real challenge.
The thing is that a lot of these are foreign ones that have got approval, their emergency approval, if you like, for usage. That's also something that other people are worried about, whether or not they are indeed safe in the long term. I mean, we're not going to know that because it is the long term we're talking about. But, what are your concerns with regards to that? And emergency approval for these, is it been detrimental for perhaps the indigenous drug makers or vaccine makers there in India?
So there are two challenges, right? So one is, I think you're alluding to the fact that the Bharat Biotech vaccine got an emergency use authorization even before phase 3 efficacy data was available. There, thankfully, phase 3 clinical trials are already underway. And Bharat Biotech has mentioned that by the end of February, we should have data. So it's really only a matter of another 5 to 6 weeks before we do know the actual clinical efficacy of the vaccine. I think what I'm more concerned about is the fact that most of these vaccines haven't been studied for very long. Both Bharat Biotech as well as the AstraZeneca SII vaccine, they have really been studied only for 6 months at best, right? We don't really know what is the long-term efficacy and the safety challenges that might crop up, if any. And you're really talking about vaccinating hundreds of millions of individuals, and we haven't really had experience running such a large-scale campaign and following up with these patients post the vaccination to make sure that you understand what the safety profile actually is like. So we don't have existing strong pharmacovigilance systems, phase 4 marketing, surveillance programs through which you can actually follow up with such a large number of individuals. And we also know that there have been reports emerging of, additional safety issues which were not identified even during phase 3, right? When it comes to Pfizer, Moderna, we are hearing reports of newer safety concerns that are emerging. So I think that is something that I'm concerned about, that as we scale up the implementation, can we make sure that we have adequate follow-ups to understand the real safety and the efficacy profile, long-term safety and efficacy profile of these vaccines?
Nithya, are you concerned that the government is embarking on this vaccine rollout pretty much on its own with little help or involvement from the private sector? What's the risk of that?
Like I mentioned before, we have the infrastructure to vaccinate around 500 million doses every year, right? But you're really talking about an additional 600 million doses to be delivered if you want to cover even the 300 million high-risk population. So you're really talking about doubling what you're doing every year, right? And that, I think, is a big challenge. It would need significant augmenting of cold chain infrastructure, as well as you would need as many more, double the number of people who can actually deliver and administer these vaccines. So I think that other than the phase 1, where we spoke about the 30 million individuals, I think the phase 2 is going to be quite a bit of a stretch if the government wants to go it alone. And I think it's far more prudent to get the private sector involved. In all my conversations with a lot of logistics providers, a lot of them are willing to step up, increase capacities, both in terms of middle mile delivery, last mile delivery, and support the program, right? So I would hope that the government actually realizes how much of a stretch there is in terms of capacity that's required, and invites the private sector to join in and support the program sooner than later.
In terms of capacity, the Serum Institute has already said that pharma companies are not increasing capacity at the rate that was initially intended. I mean, what's the risk then of a second wave, especially in a country like India?
So yes, I think a lot of the promised capacities are not really materializing as fast as we would have liked. We've seen that in the case of Pfizer, Moderna. It's yet to be seen how soon SIA can scale up capacities. I think I am concerned about the fact that the mutant strains that have been identified in UK and South Africa seem to be more transmissible, though thankfully not more severe or fatal, but it just infects are not as so much higher. And in a country like India, a more transmissible strain could actually result in far many more number of cases, and again, put your public healthcare infrastructure under strain. So as the manufacturing scales up and vaccine dissemination as well, it's not a small task. It's going to take us a long amount of time to reach out to all these 100 millions of individuals. I am concerned about a second wave if you're not able to contain these mutant strains from infecting more number of people.
Be a second wave or not, the thing is, what is going to, in your view, perhaps be safer longer term, a viral vector one, such as Bharat Biotech or AstraZeneca, or the mRNA Pfizer-Moderna school?
So typically, an RNA virus, they do not mutate as much. And if they do, most of the mutations are usually found on the surface, right? So which is why the question that these mRNA and adenovirus vector candidates, which are focused on building an immunity for the spike protein, the surface spike protein. The question then is, will they really be efficacious against these mutant strains? So I think theoretically, your live attenuated vaccines or inactivated vaccines are possibly more effective against mutant strains because they help the body develop immunity, not just against the surface antigen, they also have all these body antigens as well. Right? So theoretically speaking, that's true, but then we just don't have enough data. None of these, other than the lab study that Pfizer has published, we do not really know whether the mRNA and the adenovirus vector candidates are effective against the mutant strain, and neither do we know the inactivated virus candidate from Bharat Biotech is actually effective against the mutant strain. So I think we're really hypothesizing right now. I would love to see some more data.